Okay, welcome everybody to our pop culture event today. My name is Troy, I'm the library department chair. We're doing a series of events this fall about different aspects of pop culture, and we are excited. You know, you can't do it without including Star Wars, so we have our resident librarian, Star Wars expert, Marie Martino, who actually has given talks like this at DePaul and different conferences about thinking about Star Wars and pop culture in terms of scholarship and what it teaches us about our world. So we thought since Marie has been on the road doing these talks, we would be, remiss if we did not invite her to give a talk in our own library. Given that it's like Halloween week, we thought it'd be kind of fun and appropriate to have the talk now. So Marie, thank you for your time for that. Thank you to our audience here and online, and I'll turn it over to Marie Martino. Thanks.
Thanks, Troy. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here to present Rebellions Are Built on Hope, Star Wars, Participatory Culture, and Fan Resistance. Before we start, I would just like to thank you for being here today. And also thanks to Troy here at the library, who always assembles such great programs. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the things I've learned about Star Wars and fandoms in recent years. So of course, this presentation is going to be about Star Wars, and we'll explore a little bit of Star Wars' history and impact on our culture and politics, showing why it's an important pop culture entity. But this presentation is also about Star Wars fans, and to some degree, fans in general. So we'll explore this notion of fandom within the context of our current place and time in history, where we are not only knee-deep in digital culture, but where diversity and representation are key issues, both in the media and in the Star Wars fandom. Excuse me. Now, most people are fans of something. Initially, I came to Star Wars as a 5-year-old kid who thought spaceships and laser swords were really, really neat. And Princess Leia was clearly one of the coolest heroines that I had ever seen, especially back in the 70s and 80s when strong women characters were pretty rare. I played Star Wars with my best friend. I could quote the movies. I collected the figures, some of which I still have, and the ships. I even wore the underoos back then. So, fan cred, right? So my disclaimer here is that I arrive at this topic as a fan. I still love Star Wars, and I'm very invested in the Star Wars universe, but these days I'm much more critical of it. Maybe you aren't interested in Star Wars, and that's totally okay. Maybe, though, you know baseball like the back of your hand, or maybe you have a tattoo of a Dragon Ball Z character. Maybe you maybe you produce TikTok vids for your fellow Swifties, or maybe you cosplay Marvel superheroes. My point is here, if you're not a Star Wars fan, I hope the topics we explore here today will resonate with you in terms of your fandom. It all began a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, the 1970s. Despite the fact today that Star Wars is considered one of the most successful and influential franchises in entertainment history, if you can believe it, the film executives over at 20th Century Fox did not have high hopes or positive expectations for creator George Lucas's action-adventure space opera project. Furthermore, before it was released, theaters were reluctant to pick it up to show at their locations because the film was deemed to be a B-track screening option. Inspired by westerns and science fiction serials like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope is a story about a scrappy band of space rebels led by a princess, a scoundrel, and a farm boy who set out to dismantle the evil empire who has seized control of the galaxy. It's simple and fun, right? There's the good side, there's the bad side, laser swords, lots of explosions. Roger Ebert, who is now passed, but a beloved Chicago film critic, said of Star Wars once, "It's as goofy as a children's tale, as shallow as an old Saturday afternoon cereal, as corny as Kansas in August, and a masterpiece." And that seems pretty apt of a description. After 3 full redrafts of the original script and $11 million in production costs later, it was released in theaters. Cut to Planet Earth, May 25th, 1977, Los Angeles, California, outside of the Chinese theater, the Star Wars premiere. Of the film premiere, Carrie Fisher said, "It wasn't like a movie opening, it was like an earthquake." People flocked to it. The lines were long, people camped out for tickets. Despite only opening in about 40 plus theaters nationwide, A New Hope earned $3 million in its first week. The film ran for about a year. Film distribution and showings were a lot different back then. But before the end of summer, it had made $100 million domestically. The original film won 6 out of 10 Academy Awards that it was nominated for in the categories like art direction, special effects, best score. It also achieved a Special Achievement Award in sound. And these achievements are totally not surprising. If you've seen any of the original trilogy, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, the battle scenes were produced by using scaled miniatures. And at the time, this was revolutionary for special effects in the film industry. And in fact, Lucas built the Industrial Light and Magic Effects Company just to make the films. And this is a company that, persists today. But much to the chagrin of film critics at the time, Star Wars, along with Steven Spielberg's Jaws, reinvigorated the Hollywood blockbuster film at a time when movies were really less about spectacle and they were more about film as art and serious cultural critique. So this revitalized the blockbuster film, the Hollywood machine, and this is something, again, persists today, right? We see this with the big Marvel franchises, Harry Potter, Hunger Games, all of it. And while everything should not be fully measured just in financial terms, the numbers do definitely reveal some information about the widespread impact of Star Wars through the years. In the end, the first movie alone made $775 million worldwide. And if the ongoing success of the films today, you can tell there's ongoing success by the numbers here. The Force Awakens, which was released in 2015, which is the first installment of the last of the Skywalker saga, made over $2 billion. Another thing that Lucas and Star Wars are credited with is creating an industry model for mass marketing movie merchandise in the form of toys and other objects, quote, souvenirs inspiring legions of children and adults to recreate their viewing experience through the purchase of products. In 2012, in a very controversial move, Lucas sold his franchise to Disney for $4 billion. Now, Disney, being an even more dominant media powerhouse, profited considerably from this strategic purchase. In a 2012 MarketLine case study, it predicted that Disney would, quote, surely hold a captive market for generations to come, with Disney investing in the longer term by acquiring one of the most lucrative pieces of intellectual property available. As you can imagine, a whole lot of drama. This caused a whole lot of drama in the fandom, and I feel like that's probably just a whole other presentation, but we will talk more about Disney's role in a little bit. Through the years, between both Lucas and Disney, there have been 12 films, over 15 television series, including live action and animated, 100 or more video games, hundreds of books and comics. And Disney has a slew of more content planned for release in the coming months and years. Left in this pop culture behemoth's wake is a large population, not just of casual Star Wars consumers, but fans. Die-hard, active fans spanning over a couple of generations now. When we use terms like fans and fandom, what exactly do we mean? We're going to take a quick look at some fan studies definitions here so that we're all on the same page. The word fan refers to someone who, quote, forms an intense, affective, or emotional bond with a particular property. That property being, a text like Star Wars or Hunger Games or a video game franchise or sports team, a band, a celebrity, anything really. Fans actively engage with their object of devotion in different ways and to varying degrees. Fandom, however, describes a group of folks who share a common identity and culture with other fans who appreciate the same object. Fandoms, in a way, are defined, yes, by that identity and culture, but also by their fanish practices, what they do. So we cannot really talk about fandom without exploring this concept of participatory culture. In fact, Henry Jenkins, who is a very important scholar of media and fan studies, equates the notion of fandom with participatory culture, which we can define here as a collective of producers or contributors involved in the distribution and exchange of ideas and objects related to in this case, the fandom. So these fanish practices can include everything from following and posting on social media, writing episode analyses, building a fan wiki, recording podcasts, writing fan fiction slash fiction, creating fan art, attending conventions, cosplaying, collecting, curating materials on a website, fan activism, and so much more. It goes without saying in our evolving technology that our evolving technology has had a tremendous effect on fans' abilities to connect, to collaborate, to access information, to share, to even mobilize. Yes, fans did these things before the internet, right? But that was often in analog, in person, and it was slower to share and organize. Now with the ease and efficiency that our digital tools and platforms afford us, users who have a personal device with a network connection can share, create, and discuss on social media, publish a story. Think about how simple it is, right, to create a Tumblr site or a YouTube video. Jenkins sees this type of participation as a defining aspect of the model he has termed convergence culture, where the production, consumption, and meaning-making of pop culture has become a collective process. Media is intersecting across platforms and spaces where both media industry, corporate creatives, as well as consumers and fans all interact with one another. Think of the fan spaces you visit. You'll find what can be described as an ongoing negotiation of meaning-making and collective intelligence there. For example, Wikipedia is a huge Star Wars fandom site that is both a literal Star Wars encyclopedia and news site. On social media, I've seen a lot of resource sharing around making Star Wars cosplay and building working droids. It's so cool. People will show up at conventions with their remote droids, and it's fascinating. So this is that collective knowledge at work. Also, it's not uncommon for there to be fan conversations around retconning or retroactive continuity issues within the text, and or what counts in Star Wars as canon or not. Star Wars creators may or may not respond in these same channels, but the franchise is listening. There's a constant negotiation of the text and who is claiming ownership of that, the push and pull between the fans and the creatives. Sometimes fans do get to interact with the Star Wars creators or talent in person at fan conventions or online. Whether fans experience the direct connection with Star Wars creatives, big media corporations are very attuned to fans' thoughts and feelings these days. In fact, they use social media sites as a way to quantify, as a way to measure fan attitudes toward their specific content or products. That said, it is clear that the media industry has a financial stake in fostering fandoms, though a very specific kind of fandom. What fan studies scholar Paul Booth describes as, quote, an uncritical, passive, and consumerist fan audience. That is to say, one that's conducive to their business goals and commercial gain. They want what Booth terms as complicit fans, who both fully buy into and buy the products related to their franchise. We must remember that the entertainment industry's view of fandoms is distinct markets. It's not communities of people. We know in the big picture sense, popular culture shapes us as individuals, as societies, and in turn, we have power, if we so choose to use it, to thoughtfully shape it. If pop culture is the everyday world around us, if it is our total life picture, as Ray Brown, founder of pop culture studies, has said, then fandoms often provide us with an accessible point of entry for critically reflecting on the media and what it says about our world. Fans are already invested. They're already doing this kind of work. So it makes sense that fandoms, which remember are a type of participatory community under convergence culture, fandoms are what Jenkins, again, refers to as sites of informal learning, right? Unstructured learning. This is outside of the classroom. Bell Hooks has said, quote, it's exciting to think, write, talk about, and create art that reflects passionate engagement with popular culture, because this may well be the central future location of resistance struggle, a meeting place where new and radical happenings can occur. Similarly, scholar Paul Booth, again, situates fandoms as spaces for critical thinking that takes place outside of the academy, outside of school, right? Or what he refers to as the classroom of the future. Or, quote, one of the few places where people are encouraged to think critically, to write, to make thoughtful and critical judgments about hegemonic culture once formal schooling is complete. There's evidence that some fan practices help foster these skills. And he argues that fans may learn how to disagree responsibly and debate with respect, rather than to simply dismiss others or aggressively react in fan spaces. So fans, though, are not simply just complicit or critical, right? They're not just one or the other. They exist in both places simultaneously on a fluid spectrum of sorts. We're always complicit in the way that we buy into the product churned out by the corporate media company and everything that entails. And so Star Wars fans embrace Star Wars, embrace the Star Wars universe, or they wouldn't be part of the fandom. But fans can still be critical, civically engaged consumers who demand better from their creators. And many Star Wars fans are. And we're going to see some examples in a little bit of that civic engagement, if you will. Thinking about fan sites you might peruse, has anyone ever seen an impromptu discussion that follows like the release of a brand new episode of a television show or a film that just came out? You probably have seen fans write long posts or create videos that provide substantial analyses, right? Interpretations, criticisms, all pointing to the text as evidence. They may relate the issues of the text to what's happening in the real world, or vice versa. Tracy Van Slake, Chief Strategy Officer at the Pop Culture Collaborative, has stated, quote, pop culture is a powerful influencer of the narratives that shape everyday lives and political choices. That is to say, all media have social and political implications. Star Wars has social and political implications that reside both in its text and around its text. George Lucas intended for the original and prequel trilogies to be critiques on America's involvement in the Vietnam War and the Bush administration's war on terror and in Iraq, respectively. We have seen other scenarios where Star Wars imagery has been appropriated in various political contexts. For example, in the 80s, President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative was dubbed Star Wars, first by its critics, but then eventually by those who supported it. They adopted it because they saw the value of that rhetoric being tied to the film. In 2017, we saw protesters use the image of Princess Leia as a feminist symbol of resistance at the Women's March in opposition to Donald Trump's misogynistic rhetoric and policies. And this is an image we continue to see used today. Star Wars texts and imagery is iconic. It's ubiquitous. And its meanings can function like shorthand when used outside the entertainment arena. And it's used, again, been used by politicians, activists, and the media alike. The issues of diversity and representation, both in and around the Star Wars texts, have been an ongoing problem for the franchise. From the original trilogy's lack of diverse representation to the prequel trilogy's very problematic attempt at expanding representation, a la Jar Jar Binks, for example, to the current situation that exists now under Disney. Under the leadership of Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy, yes, we have seen a more diverse creative team, and audiences have begun to see a more diverse set of characters appear in the Star Wars universe through the past several years. Much of the progress that has been made can be attributed to the advocacy work of minoritized groups across fandoms that have used social media platforms to create a general discourse about popular culture and how it relates to the issues of identity and inclusion. Many fans welcome this newer space given in the Star Wars universe for a multiplicity of identities. However, there's a contingent of fans, myself included here, that believe Star Wars creators still need to improve how they treat and represent characters with more marginalized identities. Dan Golding, author of Star Wars After Lucas, states, "Our current media landscape is the fundamental tension for the Star Wars franchise and its political context in this moment in time. This is most apparent with the Disney Lucasfilm's release of the last trilogy, which is the sequel trilogy, which came out in December of 2015, and the subsequent projects that it's produced, including some of the newer live action shows. And we could see how the politics of representation have been playing out in and around these texts. The media we consume and the social structures of our fandoms mirror our real-life social structures. So this is true of Star Wars, other franchises, other fandoms. Sadly, and unsurprisingly though, we see racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, and other prejudices reflected in our media. The dominant narratives in media are still skewed toward what the industry identifies as their primary market for these types of franchises. And right now, the industry identifies white, straight, cis men, despite what any newer demographic or changing demographics data may show about the growing and changing fan base. So those categorized as other are often underrepresented, stereotyped, or whitewashed. Now in Star Wars, fans are seeing more women and people of color on screen, and this is certainly a positive step in the right direction, but the quality of treatment of these characters can be largely improved. And there's lots of scholarly work with evidence to show that. There's still also a dearth of LGBTQ plus identified characters and characters who have disabilities in Star Wars mainstream content. And by mainstream content, I'm referring to the films and the television shows. With the inclusion of a more diverse set of characters populating the Star Wars universe, there's been a subsequent backlash from a group of Star Wars fans, and I emphasize a very small, albeit very loud contingent, primarily comprised of white cis heterosexual men who flat out reject the more prevalent on-screen diversity. And again, I emphasize this is a very small group. They've described Kathleen Kennedy and other Star Wars creators as social justice warriors, criticizing them for spreading their, quote, woke political agenda. Star Wars fan spaces have experienced related issues. Neda Jodovich, author of Women Negotiating Feminism and Science Fiction Fandom, states, quote, fan communities offer a microcosm of society that as they encapsulate broader social rifts. And minoritized groups are fighting for representation and inclusion in fan communities. While digital media platforms have given minoritized fans an accessible means for expressing their justified critiques, as a market segment, these fans are still identified as what Susan Scott calls outliers, rather than central to popular conceptions of fan demographics. So just sort of to sum all that up, the entertainment industry caters to some fans while excluding others, and this affects the media they produce. Again, remember, all media have social and political implications. Furthermore, the industry model of fandom encourages and rewards complicit fandom. It profits from the feelings of devoted fans. It privileges those dominant narratives and readings of the texts. We see how corporations wield great power in our convergence culture and through the media. And these practices ultimately diminish the multiplicity of fan identities and underpin and reinforce the very problematic power structures in our society. So as fans, more powerfully as a fandom, we can accept, we can reject, or negotiate the messages that are embedded in the media we consume. We can passively comply and buy, or we can push back against problematic representations we see in the media we love. There is an active, quote, rebellion within the Star Wars fandom. These are critical fans who are pushing back against the industry's privileging of the white straight male fan base. They're calling out problematic narratives, and they're demanding better representation. What does fan resistance look like? Well, it has many forms among the various fanish practices we discussed before. So let's look at a few examples. The first example is of the hashtag activism related to the lack of merchandise related to Rey and Rose, who were important characters in the sequel trilogy, released again between 2015 and 2019. Folks wanting to buy merchandise started noticing that they couldn't find Rey and Rose things to buy. So there was sort of a hashtag insurgence, if you will, and eventually those images started cropping up in the new merchandise, which was a response to the critique and activism that was playing in social media. Fans were upset. In an interview with Vanity Fair, Thai Chinese American journalist Laura Sikarol expressed the importance of having representation in the merchandise as well. She said, quote, "Rose's absence felt like a diss. Star Wars is totally a lifestyle. Everyone wants to show off their love for it. Star Wars is every day. It's so important to have her on products to represent that this is my fandom. What further complicates the character of Rose in the Star Wars universe is that Kelly Marie Tran, who played her, was attacked horribly online by online trolls with racist and sexist comments. It caused her to delete Instagram posts and stay off social media for a while. And in response, she eventually wrote a column that was featured in the New York Times not long after, this was in 2018, about the harassment and abuse she suffered. And she talked about how it affected her emotionally, and then sort of summed up her article with, I want to live in a world where people of all races, religions, socioeconomic classes, sexual orientations, gender identities, and abilities are seen as what they have always been, human beings. She talks about her platform, her power, and her privilege as an actor, as a storyteller, and how she plans to use it to forward, positive representation and inclusion in within the universes she's operating in. She also states that she's the first woman of color to have a leading role in Star Wars, that she's the first Asian woman to appear on the cover of Vanity Fair, and she ends her post with, "My real name is Loan, and I'm just getting started." So it's nice to see this intersection here as someone who is part of the creative team, also working toward, good representation and sort of combating the racism and sexism that she experienced as an actor. Another example, a great example that we see in the Star Wars fandom is an example of advocacy for positive representation in Star Wars. Hashtag Star Wars Rep Matters started as a hashtag and grew. It began in October 2017 with a viral hashtag campaign. Founders Kate Sanchez, Swara Salah, and Jessica Shatara were, quote, aiming to highlight the strides in diversity and inclusion that Lucasfilm was making in the Star Wars franchise and how far it still had to go. So while they're seemingly less active these days, the hashtag Star Wars Rep Matters group facilitated monthly conversations related to Star Wars and race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, body diversity, etc. on social media sites. They ran monthly hashtag campaigns to bring awareness to these issues. And they ran a website with articles and resources related to Star Wars and diversity issues in general. The planning group also ran panels at conventions such as the Star Wars celebration that took place in Chicago in 2019. And I've seen actually some of these folks serve on other panels that I've watched on YouTube and things. And the hashtag's gotten wide usage. It's even been used by Star Wars authors, actors, and those working behind the scenes in the franchise. And interestingly, one of the founders, Swara Salah, currently hosts the podcast Middle Geeks with May Abdul-Baki, where they are, quote, two geeks of Middle Eastern descent who discuss all things Middle East and North African representation each month, along with other nerdy topics. So again, these are fans who are using their platforms to share information about diversity and inclusion. My final example here is an example of some related to a lot of the research that I've been doing in Star Wars recently. It's an example of LGBTQ erasure and how fans resisted that within the Star Wars universe. So I imagine some of you are familiar with Ahsoka Tano, who's a character in the Star Wars universe. Her character originated in the Clone Wars, went on into Rebels, and there's a live action show now of that title. In the animated series Clone Wars, audiences have seen Ahsoka queer-coded. That is to say, when we say queer coding, not explicitly or canonically queered, but presented with sort of hints, winks to fans in the know, right? Quote, simultaneous hiding and showing of queerness. So basically, folks who understand those cues, if you will, are aware of it, but those who are not in the know aren't. So fans picked up on this, and Ahsoka amassed a pretty large LGBTQ plus fan base. In 2016, a novel titled Ahsoka came out, and Star Wars contracted with queer-identified author E.K. Johnston to write it. Now, Johnston knew Ahsoka was important to queer-identified fans, and through a series of tweets, of going back to that idea of convergence culture, we see where a creator is actually connecting directly through social media with fans. She basically revealed that she knew how much Ahsoka meant to the queer community, and she said, I tried to write her in a way that anyone who wanted to see themselves in her could. I wrote her to be read as whatever kind of queer you prefer. I coded her very intentionally. So Johnston's descriptions of negotiating with the Star Wars folks, while always flattering, highlighted the sort of bargaining involved in terms of what characters and narrative details she could or could not have in the book. With regard to Ahsoka's queerness, Johnston has shared sentiments such as, Ahsoka isn't mine to label, it's above my pay grade. And in an especially revealing tweet that came out 2 years after the book's publication, she said, Ahsoka has like a corporately truncated romance. Whoops, sorry. The romance in question was with one of the book's other main characters, Kaden Larte, an LGBTQ woman with dark hair and with dark skin and hair, and who had a very big crush on Ahsoka, one of the very first explicitly LGBTQ plus characters under the Disney era. 6 years later, 2022, Tales of the Jedi came out. It's an animated series. It focused on, 3 of the episodes focused on Ahsoka. And the episode in question has key moments of overlap with the Ahsoka novel. In a Nerdist interview with Dave Filoni, who's one of the main creators for Star Wars and executives, he made a very gaslighty statement that the episode was, quote, based on the same outline I gave publishing for the novel. It was always the same story. But this new version of the story, one seen by a far larger audience, it being a television show, not the novel, it was clearly not the same story. The narrative was not only different, breaking away from the canon established by the novel, but it proved to be very problematic. Unsurprisingly, the adaptation to television skipped over large parts of the book. However, many details, including key narrative elements that could and arguably should have been included in the television show, were utterly changed or removed. Most offensive was that Kaden's character became the nameless village sister, a much more lighter-skinned woman, not rendered in any way that showed her LGBTQ identity. Fans cried retcon because of the widely varying versions of the narrative, complaining that Filoni did not respect the canon. But this incident was not merely a break in retroactive continuity, but rather an outright erasure and whitewashing of a character that is a queer-identified woman of color, a choice which illustrates the creator's blatant privilege, a grave disregard for the important intersectional representation they removed, and it was a diss to the fans who saw themselves and loved this character. So fans took to various social media platforms. A number of LGBTQ+ and fan media outlets addressed this topic in the media, calling Lucasfilm out. But this is the perfect example of where we see a common scenario play out. What Fake Geek Girls author Suzanne Scott describes as an endless self-reinforcing cycle, where first, minoritized fans offer justified critiques of hegemonic production cultures and media representations. But then the producers of the content essentially may or may not respond to the concerns, usually without any genuine or substantial commitment. Subsequently, the media industries will categorize this group as too niche. And by not addressing the issues, they actually re-empower the dominant power group. Again, white, cisgendered, heterosexual men. They're dismissing minority fans' concerns, and they invalidate their claim to authentic fan identity within their fan communities and spaces. So despite Star Wars' offensive treatment of Caden Larte, one can easily find alternative narratives, slash fiction, fan art, and other materials devoted to queer ships between Ahsoka and Caden, as well as other badass woman-identified characters that she has been paired with in her ongoing narrative. Fans querying the texts like these disrupts the essentialist notions, absolutist categories, the problematic binaries related to gender and sexuality that mainstream reinforces. It can function as what scholar Joseph Brennan calls reparative work, a way to, quote, correct the canon in line with what they see as the logical queer future of the text. And again, we see fans claiming ownership over the text. Regardless of, and perhaps despite Disney Lucasfilm's creators' intentions, and with or without their sanctioned approval, the fandom's explicit queering of Ahsoka Tano in this case, positioned as a significant and well-loved mainstream character, carves out an important space of multiplicity, not only in textual meanings, as this example shows, but in the Star Wars fandom and for LGBTQ+ identities. These examples are just some of the kinds of work fans are doing today to counter dominant narratives and problematic representation in media that media industries often employ, usually to drive their profit. In the Star Wars film Rogue One, there's a scene where the main character, Jyn Erso, pleads with the Rebel Alliance Council to send a group of rebels to the planet Scarif to steal the schematics to the Empire's weapon of mass destruction, the Death Star. In her impassioned speech, she claims rebellions are built on hope. Similarly, acts of fan resistance are built on hope. Positive resistance is a practice founded on fans taking a critical stance. It's a framework that ideally requires the imagining of a more inclusive and equitable world which values and celebrates our differences. And it is an activity fueled by the hope of enacting change in and beyond our fandoms. Okay, thank you.
All right. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay. All right. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks, everyone.